Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Attleboro Land Trust live series on Facebook, all about land conservation and protection in the city of Attleboro. My name is Evan Foster. I'm the TerraCore member for the ALT, and I'm very excited to welcome Bill Lewis as our guest today. So Bill started his work with the ALT as a land steward for the Richardson Nature Preserve. He heard about the ALT and the Richardson property through his connection with the Attleboro Geocaching Alliance. While researching and learning about the history of Richardson property, he was also asked to join the Attleboro Historical Commission. Bill started to get more involved with the land trust by joining the ALT Property Committee and then soon becoming a board member. His main work with ALT is running the Outreach and Education Committee, where he works with students from AHS in the School to Career program. He also produces the newsletter for the ALT, along with giving talks about colonial and Attleboro history. As you can see, Bill is heavily involved with the Attleboro community and holds tons of knowledge about Attleboro's history. We are very lucky to have him here today to talk about the history of the Deborah and Roger Richardson Nature Preserve. And if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please type them into the comment section and I can read them out to Bill. So with that, I'm going to pull up Bill. And so, all right, Bill, the floor is yours.
Okay. Go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to talk today about the Barrows family, colonial conservation from that era, and how it applies to us now. Next slide. The Barrows family started with Benedja Barrows and Lydia Buckland. They were married on 13 August 1706. Next slide. Good thing I had that memorized. Benedja Barrows was living in Rehoboth, and he purchased the land on 21 December 1705 from Samuel Bliss. Now, we all know the Bliss name. And it was about 100 acres. There was 50 acres designated, and then 1/2 of one plot. Go to the next slide. The Deborah and Roger Richardson Preserve now is 63 acres that we have, and it's on Wilmot Street. Next slide. This is the house as you see it from the parking lot at the Deborah and Roger Richardson Nature Preserve. Whenever I start a tour here, I always ask the people, what do you notice about the house? Well, they go and will tell me that every window is a different size, which is true. They tell me that the roof is sagging. But what they don't normally notice is there is no front door. And the reason for that is Wilmot Street did not exist when the house was built. This house was actually built in 3 or 4 stages. The center third was built first, and it is on top of a hill, which gives it a nice breeze going through the area. The eastern end, which is on the left, was built second, and that actually has a sand basement underneath it where they used to store food and stuff. There is a bulkhead going into it, but back then there was a hatch that went down from one of the rooms to get down into there. The right-hand side was built last, and there's a bedroom toward the front here, and then what they called the workers' quarters in the back, which had a wood stove in it. It now is a garage where we store equipment. The next slide. The house is built on property that was the North Purchase. The North Purchase was added into Rehoboth. The North Purchase was actually purchased from the Native Americans in 1661 because Rehoboth felt that they were too crowded. They had 5 people per square mile in Rehoboth, and they felt that that wasn't enough spacing. Now there is 255 people per square mile in Attleboro. So you can see the big difference then. The North Purchase includes all of Attleboro, North Attleboro, South Attleboro, um, Plainville, parts of Rentham, and Cumberland. Cumberland was later taken over as part of Rhode Island. Next slide. As you see here, the North Purchase, we're at the lower section here to the eastern end, and you can see that inside the circle, it has Mrs. Barrows' house and the sawmill, and there is a pond there. Next slide. Here's a map of the property as it is now, and with some things added in to show portions that were there before. If you look over toward the left-hand side, you'll see where it says an earthen dam and a sawmill. That was the main thing of this property. The earthen dam was built by Benedja and his brother Joshua, we believe, as well as the sawmill was built. Now, if you look where the brown section is toward the top middle, that's the parking lot now. Behind that is the house, which is the little gray square. And then over to the right, you'll see a horse barn. They kept the horse barn close to the house, but not right next to it because of the smell. But they kept the horses and the cows in there in the wintertime to make it easier to get to during the snow. There is 2 chicken coops that were behind the house. Now there is a garage on one of the foundations. There's also a well, which I'll point out later in another picture. And then there are 2 hog pens. Back down on the upper hayfield, you'll notice that there is the common barn. They had sheep and goats and other animals that they would keep in the common barn. Now, the big thing to look at here is you see all this wetland that is there. That's because this used to be called the Pine Swamp when Benedja bought the property. And it is a swampy area. We have vernal pools there. And we have a nice trail that winds through the area. We have the Loop Trail, and then we have Charlie Wyman Trail as well that goes up by the vernal pool. Next slide. Now, this is the house in the mid-1800s. Well, this house picture is from about somewhere between 1848 and 1870. If you notice the house, it has a shake roof, which is from white oak. And then on the left-hand side, which was the workers' quarters, that is a board and batten door. And then there's a panel door to the right. Now, you'll notice that there are no screen doors there. You'll also notice the boards toward the lower right-hand corner. You'll see boards there. That is where the well is. Next slide. Okay, now this is back toward the front of the house, like the picture that we first saw. You see where they had a mudroom there at the front left corner, eastern corner. Now that mudroom, there is rock, just had a rock foundation to it, and that rock foundation is still there. You see the little trail that's going down to the right, and you can see the building that's toward the back during this period. So this was probably a little bit later in the 1800s. And if you're just to the left of the house, you'll see a big tree. It was probably about 100 years old there, and that tree still exists, and it's still on the property. Next slide. This picture we actually have dated to 1896. You notice that they fixed up the house. They have a stake in the ground where the well was. And now there are screens on the doors, and both doors are panel doors. Next slide. Okay, here where they've taken off the mudroom, and there's no longer a door there to get into the house. The mudroom was their access to get down to the horse barn. And they made it into a little patio area, and that's now gone. Next slide. Okay, this was a subsistence farm, which is very much what it was like in that era. When Benedja Barrows and Lydia got into the house, they discovered they were one of only 500 people that were living in the entire North Purchase. So, because of that, they had to pretty much take care of everything themselves. They had to do shelter and heat, they had to do food, medical treatment, tools and supplies, education. They had to make a maximum usage of everything that they had as resources. Next slide. Now, these are the endeavors that the family was actually involved in. The sawmill was actually a coopery and a shingle mill as well. Benedja's father was John Barrows, was actually a cooper. Unfortunately, he died when Benedja was only 8 years old. But his oldest son, Robert, taught Benedja about coopering, which coopering is when you are making barrels and casks and buckets and tubs and uh, butter churns and anything that was sort of round. They also did farming. They were doing maize, corn, beans, and squash, similar to the way the Native Americans were, but adapted to a row method rather than the mound method. They had two types of hay. They had meadow hay and English hay. They did rye, tobacco. The tobacco was mainly for export. It was a big export crop going to England, so it gave them something to barter with. They also did pumpkins, carrots, sweet potatoes, and flax. The flax is what you'll see later on, is what they used to make linen. They had milking Devon cows because milking Devon cows were brought over in 1623 into Plymouth, and then they expanded into the countryside. They had horses, oxen, which were pretty much the Devon cows that were over 4 years old. Then they had sheep, hogs, chickens, geese, and goats. For production work, they were doing lumber, firewood from the branches in small pieces. They were making shingles. They would make cedar shingles for the walls, and they made oak shingles for the roof shakes. They made casks, buckets, tubs, churns. They made the linen from flax, which is a long process. They made wool. They had, I think it was 16 sheep at the time. And so they were making wool, cheese, butter, bog iron, which I'll touch on later. They were weaving baskets, because baskets were what they held a lot of stuff in, leather from any animals that they killed. They made nails. Nails were interesting because each nail had to be made by hand. So in the wintertime, when they had nothing else to do, they would get this bar stock, which they called nail stock, and they would go and actually make individual nails, which they would go and trade to the blacksmith when they were bringing things to the blacksmith. They made soap and candles. The kitchen garden, they had vegetables, kitchen herbs, and medicinal plants. Next slide. Colonial Conservation, they did recycling. They had to do wood. They replanted woodlots. It would take 6 to 20 acres per house in order to have enough firewood. As soon as they went and cut down some trees, they would plant new ones. They used waste materials. They did working with family and neighbors in order to increase their productivity whenever they had a large job to do. And they shared any excess so it wouldn't be wasted. They produced much of what they needed, and they tried not to waste anything because it took so much work to do it. Next slide. Bog iron was, there was no iron mills here, so they would actually get bog iron from the swamps. And the bog iron was actually produced by taking the ferric oxide that was dissolved in the water and producing, combining it in by the use of bacteria, two different bacteria that would make it into clumps like this. Now, it would take 20 years for these bacteria to make a clump the size of a pea. So this particular clump is probably several hundred years old. They wouldn't go and produce it, go and process it in the bloomery where they mixed it with charcoal themselves, but would take it to the blacksmith and trade it for some of the other metal items that they needed. Next slide. Here you can see in the background behind the anvil is a bunch of metal. Whenever anything broke or anything, any metal that they had, they would bring to the blacksmith when they were getting something else made and trade it in. Iron was so valuable back then that they even paid the wages of the teachers and the clergy with iron bars. Half of their wages came in iron bars because it was so valuable. Next slide. Okay, what can we do now? We can recycle. Recycling is great. That helps take care of a lot of products. And right now, they are now making roads with the excess plastic that can't be recycled other ways. In India, roads are required to be at least 10% waste plastic. In some areas in Scotland, they're making the roads with up to 90% of the plastic. We can preserve open space, wetlands, and forest. They're the cleaners of our world. The wetlands filter out the pollutants and filter out any sediment that is in the water before it goes down into the ground table. And forests, the leaves, when they are growing, actually take mineral pollutants right out of the air and help purify our air. We can plant trees to reduce our carbon footprint, and we can buy local production. Local production means we're not using transport costs, which saves us with the carbon footprint. We can use programmable thermostats. We can shut off any items that are not needed, and we can shut off power vampires. Power vampires are all the chargers that people have plugged in all the time. They're using electricity all the time, even when they're not charging anything. We can walk or bike whenever we can. And of course, being on the land trust, we definitely want people to volunteer to do preservation work. Next slide. Future plans for Richardson. We want to make the house more structurally safe and sound and clean it up environmentally in order to be able to use it for educational purposes for the school district. We also are going to be continuing to plant Deborah's garden with the historical Three Sisters Native American garden plan, as well as the colonial garden method where they put it into rows instead. We're planting native plantings at the house and at the other side of Deborah's garden. And one of the things we want to do is resume our guided walks series. Now, Evan is working on plans next week where we're going to have people doing educational things on Richardson property and other properties. And we actually used to do guided walks before the pandemic, but we want to resume that again. Next slide. Okay, these are where the slides are from. Next slide. Okay, thank you very much. Now, if you have any questions, or Evan.
Hi. Okay, that was great. Thank you so much, Phil. We definitely appreciate you taking some time to talk about this. I actually have a couple questions for you. I wanted to start with asking you about the acquisition of the property. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about why you think this was an important purchase for the land trust, both on a cultural side of it and also for on the conservation/preservation side of it.
Okay, first off, this is our premier property. It is the only property that we have that has a building on it. And we've been able to go and trace the building back. The original family that started with Benedja and Lydia were actually there for their descent. Them and their descendants were actually there for 251 years before it was sold away from the family. And that was mainly because the last people living there died out. And there was nobody left in the family right there. If you remember, I said that this was called the Pine Swamp. It is a very large area of wetlands. The map that I showed you doesn't cover all of it, and there are more wetlands to the south. Wetlands are extremely important conservation-wise. As I was explaining, it is the filter that filters the water that we drink. And the nice thing about it is the plants that are in the wetlands actually absorb toxic minerals and other toxic elements that are in the water that is washing into that area. So that actually helps purify it. Also, the layers of sand and gravel and everything that the water goes through acts as a filter of any particles and stuff. So we're getting pure water. The area around here, we have the reservoir. The reservoir gets fed by all the groundwater, and then we also have the waiting pond station, which is actually a bunch of wells that's actually tapping into that groundwater. So that the historical aspect as well as the conservation aspect, all the trees there also help purify our air. So we're trying to have the open space. We're trying to have the items that will go and use to purify the water and the air that we have to go and breathe and drink all the time.
Great. And it looks like we actually have a question from William, and he is wondering what invasive plants are on the property. Can you name a couple?
I can't. Phil is the guy for that.
Okay. Okay. I know
he's the one that I don't want to start stepping on toes here. When you have Phil on, he'll talk to you all about the invasives.
Okay, for sure, definitely. I
know we just got rid of a bunch of Norway pine over on the Larson Woodland. I know that was a big project.
Right. Yeah, I know the multiflora rose, I think, is one,
yes,
and it's throughout the field. Yeah, so it messes a little bit with the grazing of the field and that sort of stuff. So.
Right. The difficulty is you have native species, you have imported species, and because a lot of these invasives are species that were brought over to here and set up on purpose because the people had them back in England.
Great. Well, I wanted to go back a little bit to that first question I asked. I was wondering if you could talk about, I know there was a grand opening for the Richardson property. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what that was like and maybe why doing things like that is important and why people should attend those and really get involved.
Well, the grand opening was great. I gave a talk at it. There were several other talks at it. We had state rep there. We had a representative for the mayor there. We had people that walked the Charlie Wyman Trail that was dedicated. He was one of the key people on getting the Richardson property. We had over 200 people there. We also had a kids area. The kids could play all kinds of games. We had some llamas and other animals there that the kids could go and see. It's important because we're trying to get the name of the Attleboro Land Trust out there. Before I was involved with the Attleboro Geocachers Alliance, who are the stewards, they're some of the stewards of the Richardson property, I didn't know the Attleboro Land Trust existed. We got involved, the Geocachers Alliance got involved because we have geocaches on many of the Attleboro Land Trust properties. We have 15 geocaches on the Richardson property, for those who are into geocaching. So that's how I found out about it. And then we're trying to publicize the Attleboro Land Trust and what we do. It's important that people understand that we're trying to make the city a better place to live. That's part of why we're supporting we're part of Hike Attleboro, which is setting up trails. You'll see signs along Park Avenue that points to Richardson and Handy Street and Attleboro Springs, Coleman, Vaughan. So we're trying to set up a series of trails that people can get good exercise and commune with nature with. At the same time, we're using the land to help the environment.
Great. And I see William also was talking about how Phil had named some other rare trees and species that were plant species that are on the property. And I know some of that comes from Deborah, who lived there. She had planted a lot of these species. Do you know a couple of those names of the?
I believe there's a Japanese cherry.
Okay.
I believe there's a bunch of black locusts there.
Okay.
The tree that's in the front of the property that looks like that is in front of the house, that is an English chestnut. So, and a lot of you have to realize that that entire property was clear cut at one time. We have pictures showing the hill where that one tree is totally clear cut in that picture, but now it's all grown up again. Um, when we look at the probates from when the people died and were having an inventory done on the property, there was white oak, red oak, pine, elm, beech, birch, um, ash. Um, there was a lot of different trees that aren't there now that they had in there. They predominantly replanted it with the pine. The At the sawmill, they would use the pine scraps and the scraps from other softwoods to heat the place during the wintertime. At the house, they would use the scraps from the hardwoods to go and heat there. They would use the ashes from the softwoods would be used to fertilize the kitchen garden because it acts as a good fertilizer. It's just the minerals. The hardwood ashes from the fireplace in the house would be used to make the lye that they used to make the soap. So they were using all the waste materials to be able to do things. And they planted mainly oak and pine on the property because those were the most profitable for them to produce.
Nice. Very cool. So I wanted to transition a little bit over to some of the community engagement work and outreach that you have done. I know you work with the schools and some of the classrooms there. Have you had students come out to this property specifically to do some work?
We have the Attleboro, well, it's not just Attleboro, it's the School to Career program in the summer. And those students come from Attleboro High, Norton, Mansfield, Seekonk, and North Attleboro high schools. And we've had them out there. They've worked on Deborah's garden. We have an irrigation system in there now that they built. Yes, we've had them there for the 2 years before, the 2 summers before the pandemic. We are planning on having them again this year out there to do more work. As well, they'll be helping to remove invasives. We have a little bit more work to do on Deborah's garden. We have another little boardwalk that we want to put in. So those are all projects that we'll be working with them this summer. We also do stuff with the farm to table class at Attleboro High. And we just completed reskinning the one greenhouse at Attleboro High so that the students can continue to use it. They actually grow microgreens and other crops in the there to provide supplies for the culinary classes. And then we're also working some with Willett School in order to work toward a program where we want to put a school garden in at all the schools in the district. That's a long-term project. But we want to, farming is a very important part of our conservation effort. Because farms go and absorb the carbon, and local farms support the community.
Great. I also just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, you can put them in the comment section. I also was wondering, can you talk about what you're planning to do with the garden this coming summer?
Yeah, this summer we're going to be setting it up as a Three Sisters garden. We're doing it, we're fencing it in because the last couple of years the animals have destroyed it. And because it's a conservation area, we can't kill them. We try to go and trap them and relocate them, but they keep coming back. So this year we're fencing in Deborah's garden area. We're going to be growing the Three Sisters garden, both the mound way of the Native Americans, which is the maize corn, which you use to make tortillas, the beans, which we're going to be using a couple different squashes and pumpkins. And we're going to be doing that was the squashes, and then the beans were beans that were here at the time of the Native Americans when the colonists first got here. We're also going to be doing it in the furrow method, which the colonists adapted, where they put the corn in on the top of a mound that they furrowed up, and then we'll put the beans in and the squash and pumpkins in between. Then we're also got 3 sets of corn seeds from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They are research seeds, some of them which were harvested way back in 1954. And we're going to do a project with the students where we're going to determine germination rate and production of these seeds that have been stored in they've been stored at the seed bank out in Iowa. So that's a project for the farm to table class.
Great. That sounds very exciting and like some awesome work. So I have just one more question for you, a more personal question. I'm wondering what your favorite part of the property is and why.
I have 2 favorite parts. I have the house because I've done a lot of work on it, and it's very interesting to study how it was made and how it's been adapted. The fireplace has actually been adapted 3 different times. The first fireplace was built there, was made out of fieldstone, which are stones you find out in the field, and there are still traces of that if you're looking behind it. The next one was made out of brick, and it was actually had a large oven because they only baked once a week because it was all sourdough baking. And so it had a large oven. And then now the final fireplace is got 2 small ovens as well as the fireplace. And they've actually cut the angle in tighter, which is the Rutherford method of making it so it directs the heat out more. And they've also added 2 more fireplaces in the center section. And then my other is always Deborah's garden because of the agricultural work that we're doing there, and the fact that we've gotten to work with the students on that. The students did a lot of the work there on putting in the irrigation system, clearing the land, and everything. So we enjoy working with the students. It gives us an insight into them and them an insight into us.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Bill. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before I wrap it up?
If people have questions, they can put it on the Facebook page, and I can go and answer them later on if they have other questions. I think you have Phil coming up in the future, and he'll be able to talk a lot more about the invasives and stuff like that.
Okay, great.
And we had a guided walk with him before where he was talking about all the plants on the property. We'd like to get that going again, possibly this summer.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Get people outside and educating them about the properties. Great. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for that great presentation and this great conversation. I also just want to let everyone know, I know Bill had mentioned it, but we are hosting a series of family-oriented events and activities for Earth Week, which is next week. And this is also April vacation for the public schools. So it's a great opportunity to get outside and participate in some really fun activities on some of our properties. And the events are posted on our website, which I have put in the chat, our website, along with, you can email me directly if you want to sign up for a time slot in one of the activities. I would go to either our Facebook page or our website to read about what each activity is. And yeah, so thank you so much, Bill. Thank you for all of you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we will see you on another episode, and that will be on Friday at noon. So be on the lookout for those. So again, thank you, everyone, and everyone have a great day. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.